I'm surrounded by the beauty of a living coral reef. It is an incredibly beautiful and magnificently diverse ecosystem, one of the richest in the world. While it has all sorts of creatures, it derives its name from the humble coral polyps, whose colonies construct the reefs with their complex structures and which all the other creatures rely on, as together they constitute one of the most complex ecosystems in the world, the coral reefs. Let us go on a journey to understand the coral reef. I am an avid scuba diver and a lover of coral reefs, and I remain mesmerized by the beauty and variety of the reefs. So let's go to get to know more about coral reefs. First, as a reminder of past discussions, what is a coral? Corals are tiny animals whose tiny skeletons accumulated over the generations build the reef.
They are a rich source of life, but they're also very important to people. Around the world, in tropical areas, many folks depend upon coral reefs for their food, for their medicines, for their livelihoods.
Corals are part of the cnidarian family, which covers some 9,000 species, and that includes corals, sea anemones, jellyfishes, hydroids, and sea pens. Of the corals, we can generally, by appearance, define two broad groups. Soft corals, which look like whips, plumes, and even sometimes like broccoli. And hard corals, those who actually build the reefs. There are about 800 species that are classified as reef builders. And again, by appearance, we can recognize different hard corals. Stony corals, scleractinians, are prodigious reef builders. Among the stony corals, identified by their skeleton shapes, including sometimes massive boulder or brain corals, sometimes plating corals, sometimes table corals, sometimes branching corals, sometimes lettuce leaf corals, and encrusting corals that surround existing structures. Now, these stony corals are rampant colonizers, members of the Acropora genus, among the fastest growing and most adaptable and highly variable in form, from bushy or tippy-toes to the classic staghorns. And then there are the gorgonians, or fan-like corals. Now, understanding the relationships between different corals and all the creatures that live on the coral reef is worthwhile investigating.
And this is an opportunity where continuing to understand the planet that we live in and our role in it and the impact we have is fundamental for the future of society.
Life on Earth is amazingly complex, and we are such a tiny proportion of that complexity and such recent element in that complexity.
At the base level, all life on the reef draws energy from the sun and food from planktons. These very, very tiny creatures, diatomaous and other shaped, that are eaten by the plankton eaters. And so a feeding chain emerges. There are the plankton feeders, like the corals themselves. There are herbivores, that are fish and other creatures that eat algae from the corals. And there are carnivores that eat other fishes and other creatures. And then ultimately there are the scavengers or the recyclers that deal with the detritus that is left over so that nothing is lost and everything is recycled. Now, plankton are very small drifting plants and animals. They're usually drifting or floating in the sea or fresh waters sometimes. They consist chiefly of diatoms, protozoans, very small crustaceans, the eggs and larval stages of larger animals, and many animals are adapted to feed on plankton, especially by filtering the water. Plankton usually need a microscope to be properly seen and studied. They tend to be defined by their size. The ultraplankton, the very small ones, is less than 5 microns. A micron is 1/1000th of a millimeter. Microplankton is 50 to 500 microns, mesoplankton 500, and then there are the macroplankton that are 5,000 microns of a millimeter. Sometimes we refer to megaloplankton, which is maybe even bigger than that, but very rarely. Most of the time we are talking about very tiny microscopic creatures that are captured and eaten by those who filter drifting water. Now, the structure of a typical coral polyp is, in fact, organized to attract these plankton and eat them. But the coral polyps cannot exist without their symbiotic relationship with plants called the zooxanthellae, are together plankton feeders. And then come the herbivores, such as this parrotfish. Then come the carnivores, fish who eat fish and animals who eat other animals. And to complete the cycle, we have the scavengers, bristle-worms, fireworms. All of these are active foragers for dead or dying material, which attracts them by emitting chemical cues as they start to decompose. The detritus, including defecation of fish, are recycled by sea cucumbers and other forms of bottom dwellers. Near the reefs, we find habitats with link to off-reef habitats. We can specifically mention seagrasses and algae, as well as mangroves. In addition, pelagic fish, which are usually swimming near the reefs, are not attached to the reef in some way, and they prefer their open sea habitats and visiting the reefs from time to time. Now that we have identified all these communities, it is time to meet some of the fascinating individuals who make up the reef communities. Many of us know the seagrasses and the brown seaweed, but among the most beautiful of these individual seagrasses and seaweeds are the Halimeda green algae and the sea pearls or sea grapes. And then there are the sponges, tube sponges usually purple, and crusting sponges, which can be bright red or bright yellow. And the corals themselves, the members of the Cnidarian family with its about 9,000 members, are, as we said, broken down into several main groups, including the anthozoans, who are the corals and the anemones, the hydrozoans, who are the fire coral, and the scyphozoans, the jellyfishes, and the cubozoans for the box jellies, the most lethal of which are found in Australia. Now you can ask, what do they have in common? The coral polyps and the jellyfish? Well, think of them as upside-down versions of each other. The jellies swim with their tentacles downwards, and the coral polyps are fixed with their skeletons and have their tentacles upward. Both of them are symmetrical around the spherical appearance with their mouths in the middle. We call that radial symmetry. All of that family have nematocysts that can sting. Most of their sting is harmless and barely felt by human beings. So think of corals as colonies of little anemones or jellies next to each other, and think of jellies as floating anemones or coral polyps. Now let's meet some of these interesting species that exist in the reef ecosystem. Beyond the reef builders, we have the soft corals. These do not have the calcium carbonate skeleton and are not usually considered reef builders. They include the Alcyonaceae, and unlike stony corals, most soft corals can thrive in nutrient-rich waters with less intense light. But they still all rely on the zooxanthellae as a major energy source. Here are jellyfishes, feathery hydroid, a sea penny, ribbon worms, polyclad flatworms, and nudibranchs are a group of soft-bodied marine gastropod mollusks with extraordinary colors and striking forms. Currently, we have identified more than 2,300 species of nudibranchs. One of the most beautiful of all mollusks in the sea is the Spanish dancer. And here are the eggs of the Spanish dancer attached to a rock. Even sea slugs look attractive. And we must not forget the seashells. The cowries, in particular, are plentiful on the reef. But other mollusks demonstrate great interest. The octopus is probably one of the most intelligent creatures in the sea. And the squids, those delightful calamari, are also very fast-moving creatures in the sea. And then we have the giant clams, and we have the thorny oysters, and we have the heterobranchs. And sometimes we see swimming in the water almost transparent little creatures that can bond into each other, called the salps or the sea squirts. And peeking out of the rocks and from small holes in rocks or in the coral itself are the feather duster worms that come out and with their beautiful colors capture passing plankton and then pull back whenever they sense the slightest motion in the water around them. We have painted crayfish, semi-transparent cleaner shrimp, or sometimes white and red cleaner shrimp. We have hinge-beak prawns, spiny lobsters among the crustaceans, the king of which, of course, is the painted rock lobster. And we have fish that live near the bottom and eat at the bottom. Goatfish, for example, and eels, who are predators and hide in the rocks. And then there are scorpionfish, so called because if you step on them, their spines can be toxic. But they are magnificently camouflaged, and unless you really look hard, you can hardly recognize the scorpionfish. And even beyond that, there's the stonefish that looks exactly like a stone. And you can hardly recognize it unless it moves. And then we have seahorses. And we have reptiles, such as the turtle. And fish who swim in schools, or sometimes by themselves, like the sharks or the rays. And at or near the reefs, we even have mammals, the dolphins. Now, not only do all these creatures interact on the reef or near to it, but they also demonstrate amazing behavior patterns. Now let's discuss these behavior patterns. First is symbiosis. That's the collaboration between two types of creatures for the benefit of both. The most famous of which, of course, is the collaboration of the coral polyps with the zoosantheres. But there's also this amazing willingness of small cleaners to go into the mouths of larger creatures to clean their mouths and sometimes their gills. And they don't seem to care which creature they go into their mouth. Even my colleague Ihab, with whom we dive together in Sharm el-Sheikh. Then there are those who get carried around by other creatures, like the starfish shrimp is found on the bottom of a blue sea star. Harlequin crabs riding on a sea cucumber, and they demonstrate sexual dimorphism. The female at right is much bigger than the male at left. And shrimps and tiny seahorses share a perch on this beautiful fan coral. If the tiny seahorse were to venture too close to the shrimp would nip it to protect its own turf. And then, of course, with fish, there is always this magnificent schooling and feeding behavior. Feeding, of course, involves predation for some. There are those who forage on the reef. And then there are those who are ambush predators like the groupers or the eel. Some, like this harlequin shrimp, feeds exclusively on sea stars. And the rabbitfish gang up on an unidentified jellyfish to eat it to pieces. Sometimes we notice shadowing behavior, so that some smaller fish swim right next to a larger fish and use the large fish as a protection so that they are not easily seen and not easily attacked. And there are defensive measures. Many creatures hide from predators, but many stay in schools, which makes it harder for the predator to focus on one specific target. Many have toxic defenses and announce that with bright colors, like the lionfish. Many are known to taste absolutely terrible, and also they announce that with bright colors, like the nudibranchs. Some creatures have evolved magnificent camouflage ability. They are masters of camouflage. Look at this scorpion fish, or this stonefish. If they do not move, you can hardly see them. Also, this frogfish. You can hardly notice it among the sponges. Groupers can change their colors to match their surroundings. Look at examples of natural camouflage, from the shrimp to the flounder. The pygmy seahorse. They all exhibit remarkable camouflage, living in the branches of a sea fan or crabs and cuttlefish. And then there is mimicry, when one species pretends to be another to benefit from its known poisonous or other defenses. And there is reproduction. Now, corals somehow know how to release eggs and sperm into the water so that the fertilized eggs will drift on the currents and ultimately land elsewhere and help start new colonies of corals. But many of the creatures on the reef attach their eggs to the rocks of the reef. Look at this beautiful ribbon-like structure, the eggs of a Spanish dancer. There is both cloning as well as sexual reproduction. And many creatures can lose an arm like the sea star and then grow it again. Throughout the reef, there are creatures, especially fish, which are monogamous. A couple mates for life. And they watch over babies growing up, and the babies growing up display different colors so that adults will tolerate them and not chase them away. And the differences can be quite impressive. Look at the junior batfish and the adult batfish. Look at the junior emperor angelfish and the adult emperor angelfish. I could go on and on about this marvelous and magnificent world under the sea, but regretfully, the coral reefs of the world are at enormous risk right now. We are losing them. With all their splendor and their color, we are losing them at a very fast pace. Why are our coral reefs at risk, and what can we do about it is an important story. But that is a story for another day. I am Ismail Serageldin, and I thank you for having joined me in this episode of Horizons.